Good evening. I will call the meeting to order. I am Patty McCoy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I will have the board members introduce themselves. We'll start on my left with Mr. Wilson.
Good evening, Sean Wilson.
Good evening, LaRonda Chastain. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. This is Anupam Chugsidhu. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Patrick Keogh. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Hi, good evening. Lauren Christensen.
Dr. Merritt, would you like to introduce yourself and your staff?
Good evening and welcome. I'd like to begin by introducing my assistant, Ms. Diane Robertson, and I thank her for being here to capture our minutes for our community members that are not here and for the work of the board. So we appreciate you, Ms. Robertson. I'd like to ask the remaining members of the staff to introduce themselves to you, beginning with Mr. Brandon.
Thank you, Dr. Merritt. Nick Brandon, Executive Director of Communications and Marketing. Welcome.
Good evening, Kurt Tiskowitz, Executive Director of Student Services.
Good evening, Beth Rail, Chief Academic Officer. Thanks for being here.
All right, we will stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we are down to A, adoption of agenda and approval of the consent agenda. I am looking for a motion for action item 220466.
Madam President, I move that we adopt the agenda, approve the consent agenda, action item number 22-04-66.
Thank you. I'm looking for a second.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Member Sadoo and seconded by Member Kehoe that we adopt the agenda and approve the consent agenda. Dr. Merritt, will you take us through it, please?
Yes, this evening the consent agenda consists of human resources transactions since the last time we were together. We have resignations and retirements for your consideration. We have the approval of minutes from our regular meeting on April the 12th, 2022, and our special meeting on April the 13th, 2022. We have first reading of policies 8390, animals on district property. I know we have many students that are eager for that policy to go forward. So they can bring the therapy dogs back to their campus. So interested in working through that process for that. Also, the final reading of policies 3362-4362, anti-harassment, policy 5341, emergency medical authorization, policy 5342, do not resuscitate orders, DNR for minor students, policy 5343, physician for scope of treatment, post, and policy 5517, anti-harassment.
All right, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. All right. Mr. Tiskowitz, did you have anything?
I will share on behalf of Dr. Vartanian Gibbs. Just want to lift up the names of our amazing educators that are retiring from our school district. We want to thank them for their years of service. Miss Audrey Bauza, she was currently behavior support specialist, and Bird has worked here in our district since 1995. Miss Susan Justice, elementary teacher at Smith Elementary School since August 27th, 1990. Terry Kay, elementary teacher at Dotson Elementary School, has been employed with our district since 1998. Jennifer McLaughlin, a math teacher in the Middle School Virtual Academy, has been employed with Plymouth Canton since 1996. Renee Nowalski, science in the Middle School Virtual Academy, has been employed here with Plymouth Canton since 1986. And finally, Heather Robinson, teaching math at Salem, has been a part of our P-CCS community since 2000. We thank all of our educators for their dedicated years of service to our students, and we wish them well on this next chapter in their journey.
All right, so we are now on to celebrating success, and it is me. Very excited. Celebrating success this evening will honor Plymouth High School student Ani Krishnan. During the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, Annie's older brother, who has autism, was feeling extremely lonely. As a way to help his brother, Annie started hosting weekly Zoom meetings with several other high school students with special needs. He has continued to host these weekly touch-based meetings ever since, and now also sets up social events for the group, which is expanded to include both middle school students and alumni. These outings have consisted of picnics in the park, trips to get ice cream or play laser tag, checking out local events like the Fall Festival in Plymouth and the Ice Festival. Not only does Ani organize all of these gatherings, he also pays for them out of his own pocket, selling artwork to help pay for the costs. He's taken sign language classes on his own time so that he can communicate with anyone who has hearing loss. On top of the amazing, thoughtful program, which has been dubbed the AK Friendship Circle, Ani is a varsity athlete competing in track and cross country at Plymouth High School and maintains an outstanding grade point average. I would like to invite Becky Nimaguth, P-CCS Special Education Staff Member, to the podium to share more about Ani's selflessness and positive impact this group has had on other students in our community. Also, Ani, come on up.
I was really moved to nominate Ani for this award because of the comments of all of the parents of the students that he now has joining his friendship circle. They just speak so highly of him and how wonderful he is and how kind he is. He's never condescending. He never treats any of the kids who come to these events or to the Zoom with anything less than friendship and kindness and respect. He's constantly trying to move things forward. He's even made his group a 5013C, yeah? Wow. C3, good, yep, trying to do that off memory, sorry. But he's even gone as far as doing that, not for the funding, but just to make it official so that it's always going to be in place. And really it started because he knew and saw the need in his brother, and he knew other students would have the same need. Many of those kiddos are students from my class, and it warmed my heart instantly when I heard that they were getting together for something social. I have even tried to swing an invite, but he doesn't really want adults there. He wants them to be able to act like kids. So lo and behold, I just get to hear about it from them. But he's pretty fantastic. He's a true star of our community.
On behalf of the Board of Education, I present Ani Krishnan the STARS Award for students with tenacity, achieving and reaching success, for his generosity and extraordinarily kind heart that has benefited so many people around him. There's your thing, and thank you so much. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure. All right. First, I'd like to thank my parents and brother for helping me organize this group. I couldn't have done it without them, and the group is just amazing. I get to make new friends, and we all get to hang out and everything, and it's just awesome to see them every day, every time we meet up. So that's about it. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, and you want his parents also? And brother?
How about all the kiddos that are in?
Oh, yeah.
And Ani's cards are awesome. Yeah, he sells cards, yeah. You can get them from him. You go to his nonprofit fundraiser.
Please. You have a website?
It was an email. I'll send you the email.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. That should be the front page of the story. How about that?
Yeah, those are the kind of stories we love to share with our community.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, Ani.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, so next up we are on to board committee reports and action. First up is the president's report. So people may be aware that we have now started calling Superintendent Merritt Dr. Merritt. She is now Dr. Merritt. She successfully defended her dissertation last Wednesday at Michigan State University. And she has a PhD in educational leadership. And the board would like to congratulate her. This is a huge accomplishment. And her dissertation was on 35A, Funded Early Literacy Interventions Policy and Practice.
Congratulations, Dr. Merritt.
I am humbled. Everyone that knows me knows that I don't like to be the center of any attention, so I just appreciate I appreciate just the support of the Board of Education, of our administrative staff, our teachers, everyone, our village, my village, on this journey. That has not been an easy journey by all means. You all know the things that I have experienced personally in my own life, and I don't want to get choked up, but lost both my parents during the first year of the program, and actually was going to say, I'm going to quit right now, it's not time, because then the pandemic hit. Before my father's death, he did ask his doctor, he says, I got things to do. They told him he had 3 months to live. He said, no, it's not time to go. I got things to do. I got to see my baby graduate. He says, oh, well, maybe we can give you this treatment and give you a little bit more time. When is she going to graduate? He says, probably about 3 more years. Ironically, today, Mr. Tiskowitz shared with me a picture that my father was here. He came to the district on this day 9 years ago to speak to our students. And it came across his Facebook memory feed. And it was just affirmation to me. Dad, we did this. We got this. Just continue to push through. And I think about this whole entire journey. It's surreal. Can't believe I got through. Glad made it over the finish line. I just think about the importance as the lead learner in this district, even as old as I am, that learning is always so important. You're always learning and strengthening your tool box. And I think about just our students, and representation matters for our students to be able to see me here in this seat, again, as old as I am, with this accomplishment. I just hope to be able to continue to be a role model and continue to use these tools to further our work here in the district, because we have incredible students, as you just seen in Ani, and we have so much work left to be done. So just thank you again. I appreciate the support, and for the next few months, I probably don't want to read any research articles or write. But again, I will continue to sharpen my tools and all the professional learning that is necessary to keep leading this district. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Love it.
Well, so that was the exciting news. Just remind the board of a few, Thursday, superintendent evaluation at 6 o'clock here. Saturday is the mental health fair in Kellogg Park, starting at 10 and goes till 2. That's a family-friendly event for anybody in the community, right downtown Plymouth. Sunday is SJ 5K. There were these bands out there. Also would like to thank Mr. Kehoe for organizing sponsorship for the board and Dr. Merritt of the SJ 5K. And then Saturday, May 7th, is the Student Art Fair. If you signed up to be a judge, you have to be there between 7:30 and 11:30. And if you don't want to be a judge, you can go after 11:30. and see. It's always fantastic. The art is great. So anybody in the community who would like to see it, it's fantastic. You're like, wow, all this talent right here. So that is it. Next up is Student Performance and Achievement Committee with Member Sadoo.
Thank you, President McCoyne. We have not met since our last meeting. However, we do have a meeting coming up on May 4th, Wednesday, right here in this room at 5 p.m. Hope to see some of you there.
Next up is the Policy Committee, and we did meet tonight, right before the this meeting. We briefly discussed the animals on district property, and we did have a student who had contacted us in support of the policy, and we do appreciate hearing from students when they contact us about these things. Unfortunately, the email reply to him bounced back twice, so I'll maybe try it again tomorrow. Mr. Tiskowitz did reply to him, however. And we've talked about anti-harassment, seeing if we need to take another look at our racial and educational equity policy, some school safety information, and we will be meeting again May 24th in the collaboration space, which is down the end of this hallway. We meet at 5:30, and the community is more than welcome to attend. Next up, we have Finance and Operation with Mr. Kehoe.
Fantastic. We met last Thursday here in this room, 5 p.m. We reviewed the March financial statements for the district, as well as one of the items up on the agenda this evening, the purchase of the Chromebook carts. The next meeting that we have is on Thursday, May 5th at 5 p.m. here in this room, and again, the community is welcome. At that time, we'll be reviewing the playground installation award package bid for the elementary schools, EL2, as well as the final portion of the high school 2 natatorium and the rebids as part of that process. So those are the final processes to be able to get that project moving forward. Again, the community is welcome, and we appreciate your attendance.
All right, thank you. So next up is Superintendent's Report with Dr. Merritt.
All right, thank you. This evening, I want to spend some time just updating our board and our school community on, first, a letter that I shared last Friday, an additional incident that our school community has had to experience involving hate speech and racial intimidation, but really spend some time talking about the work that our district is engaged in, we have been engaged in, and the work that we're planning to do as we move our district forward. As I shared on Friday, we had an incident at our P-CCS campus early in the morning. One of our students found a poster, or reported finding a poster in the high school that contained hate speech. I am really appreciative of our Principal Lewis and her team that immediately went to work with our security team, contacting local law enforcement. They were able to identify those individuals involved in that matter. That is currently a situation that is being handled with our local law enforcement. And as always, any individual involved will be addressed in accordance with our K-12 handbook. And we'll look to and really define what does that look like, and those consequences are appropriate as defined through actions that we all, as a Board of Education, as an administration, as a school district, continue to denounce hatred and bias and these acts that are so harmful to our student environment. So with that, I did think it was appropriate this evening to really talk about that, our journey to date and what we plan to do as we work forward. And I'm going to capture these items under what we've done for policies and procedures, what we've done in the form of human resources, what we've done for professional learning and training for our staff, and also really just address the items again on some activities that we've engaged in the last few weeks and some planned activities in the future. So when I talk first about our policies and procedures, and I think I talked at the last meeting about the importance of our educational racial and equity policy. So that was first approved by our Board of Education in 2012, and was updated and looked at by this Board of Education and just adopted again the updated version on February the 22nd. And talking about the importance of policy, because it really guides what we do, who we are, but what we do and how we hold ourselves accountable. And that's really how we impact change for our students and school community. Also applauding this school board for our latest iteration of our dynamic plan, in which you set the vision for our strategic themes and our strategic objectives. And the very first theme being that of making sure that we are a school district that is grounded in social justice and anti-racism. And what does that look like? How does that show up? Our students are reporting in this space that we have an inclusive environment where they feel safe, not just physically safe. And we've talked a lot about safety and security, our lockdown on December 9th, but also psychologically and emotionally safe. And we know the impact of race-based experiences and hate and bigotry on our students, and how we can expect them to show up and learn in an environment where they don't feel safe is something that we all need to wrap our minds around, that we have to be committed to making better. And so that dynamic plan has been approved, and is that something that will guide our work, our compass for the next 6 years here in our district. The hate and bias reporting form, that was a new form that we implemented this school year. And this is giving students another tool to specifically be able to report to our school district incidences of racial or any kind of hate bias that they are experiencing. We always still have the okay to say, but we recognize that that is an anonymous tool. We also recognize we have to build trust in our students. But this tool really gives students the opportunity. They can remain anonymous if they choose, but to identify, it's a limited number of administrators who have access or are pinged. Our Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Dr. Denise Lilly. Our level leaders, Mr. Hal Hurd for the high school, Mr. Anthony Ruella for the middle school, Ms. Maureen Malloy for the elementary school. We have now since updated me as a person as well that is notified anytime a student utilizes this form. And we are then responsible to touch base within the building levels to ensure that this form is followed through, that the students are talked to. A gap, I will say, in our procedures have been that when we address this, and honestly, as we continue to talk about, we're not able to talk about what has happened to students in terms of discipline. But we need to be able to share with students that something has taken place, because in the absence of hearing that information, they may assume that we're not addressing that. And so that commitment within that work of the administration to circle back with that student who has reported within 24 to 48 hours to ensure that this has taken place. So we are now working to educate our students about this process. Just even today at the PCCS campus, district building level administrators worked with student leaders to do a video where the students really engaged in questions with us about policies and procedures in this reporting process that was shared during the high school students ESA block, and then giving opportunities to kind of debrief and talk about what does this look like, how do you report. So that will be continued work. We're going to get those posters. They're currently in our hallways, but we're getting those produced to put in every single classroom. These have a QR code so that the students can use at home or in school, an opportunity to get to this form. Also adding those to the Canvas pages of our teachers so that that is accessible for our students as well. And even talking about, as this year the state required on our ID cards, that we put the okay to say on the back of our ID cards, seeing if we can begin the school year next year with adding those that reporting mechanism to our ID cards. Again, all of the information on these reports have to make it over to our MyStar system. So our MyStar system is the official record for student discipline for events that take place. So we want to make sure that we're continuing the work with our staff on training. We've had training over the last, recently with our staff in terms of the accuracy of coding and the consistency of coding infractions, so that we ensure that what is this true definition? What is a verbal threat? What is racial intimidation? What is aggressive behavior? Making sure that we have a clear definition of what these offenses are and that they're coded appropriately and consistently in the MyStar platform. We think about our human resources, and you've heard us talk about this here at the board level, really our intentional work to diversify our staff to be reflective of our diverse demographics among our students. And so we have a long way to go, but we've made consistent progress along the way. It's not, as you will hear us say, just about hiring diverse staff, but making sure that we're supporting our staff. Because as we talk about our students, our staff equally needs that support and resources in order to create a positive environment and experience for them at school. So I'm working through our affinity groups, so it allows for safe spaces for our staff to share their experiences, our staff of color, our diverse staff, and to have the support that they need. Also in spring of 2021, we worked with our union leadership to ensure that there was some more flexibility within our contracts as we're looking to recruit additional diversified staff, some barriers that would allow for seasoned staff to come in to our district at potentially higher levels based on their experience from other districts. In fall of 2021, we've worked to strengthen the evaluation process. When we think about that which gets measured gets done. So there has to be a high level of accountability from, again, the boardroom down to the classroom through that evaluation process. Working on walkthrough tools for our administrators to use when going to classrooms to ensure that culturally responsive practices are occurring and the environments are inclusive for students, and then making that a part of the evaluation process. When we think about professional learning, I do want to spend time to really highlight the intentional and I think high quality work that has taken place a lot under the leadership of Dr. Lilly. First, from 2015 actually to the present, we were engaged in restorative practices training for our administrators, for our staff. We did pause during the pandemic, and so that's some work that we need to pick up, redo for new staff, as well as some retraining of additional staff that have come on board. We've continued that training for new hires. We have support specialist deans that administrators that are new to the district, they had training in spring of 2022. We'll continue with middle school trainings in the fall of 2022. We have completed all elementary level trainings. In September of 2019, we engaged in implicit bias and microaggression training. These were our administrators, our non-affiliated staff. We worked with the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion to complete that training. October of 2020, professional learning, we engaged with Dr. Goldie Muhammad on cultivating genius through learning pursuits. Our curriculum and instruction and EL departments have worked to align our learning pursuits with curriculum guidelines. Again, in October 2020, along with this work, we've had professional learning for all staff on interrupted bias to cultivate genius, and that's where we are exploring and engaging with staff in the concept of implicit bias, examining the impact and the effects of implicit bias on our students, and identifying ways to increase cultural responsiveness in classrooms. From January of 2021 through to July of 2021, we've engaged in professional learning with Zaretta Hammond and Dr. Brady and our CI curriculum and instruction team, alongside Dr. Lilly, are working to support our instructional coaches through the lens of culturally responsive educational practices by design to align our coaching protocols. September of 2021, we've had culturally responsive instruction, equity by design. This is professional learning from all staff. They centered on the following areas of deficit thinking, cultural identity, rigor, cultural empathy, and intellectual safety. Ongoing is our continued work with our curriculum and our instruction materials. We're again making sure that we have diverse representation and perspectives that allow this concept of mirrors and windows. When you think about mirrors, that's allowing our students opportunities to see themselves reflected in the content and the materials that are before them. And then if you think about this idea of a window that is looking out, so creating opportunities for our students to look beyond themselves and learn about the experiences of others. In February of 2022, we had a staff communication, all staff communication, that addressed for our school community the use of slurs within the classroom. And when we're looking at materials, if we're looking at standards that have to be met and looking for different material that we can use to address that standard that would not contain slurs. If it is that we have material that is being taught that contains slurs, to make sure that we are appropriately preparing or front-loading our students with that information. but at no time do we verbalize slurs within our school environment. And so that's communication that we worked on in February to support our staff. And then most recently in March of 2022, the racial trauma training. This has been conducted with Mandolin Graham, Miss Mandolin Graham that was here. Our district building level administrators have been trained, really trying to work to understand racial trauma and its impacts, how it overtly and covertly shows up in our schools and our classrooms, and the impacts on our students and their learning. Ms. Graham was able to present here to you as Board of Education members, and I heard that request to have her come back and do further training. And we've engaged with her in conversations around continuing that work. So not just with staff, but another layer is working with our students. And I think as we've talked over the last couple weeks with our students, they have really brought forward, when we talk about one of our objectives is really to engage student voice. They said, we know all of this training that you've been doing, we want to be a part of that training as well. And so really listening to them and working on a plan to engage them in that training. When we look truly of what is that path to move forward, so we think about all of this intentional work that we've done around diversity, equity, inclusion, and still we have issues within our climate that demand change. And so when we think about that path forward, one thing we've heard from our community is the need to be more transparent within our communications. Board of Education issued a statement on Friday evening. We issued a statement about that most recent incident. We had an incident that occurred at Isbister Elementary School on hate speech on the outside of one of our buildings last evening that is still under investigation, getting that communication out right away. And so just to ensure that that gap is closed so that parents know that it's not just, families know that it's not just we're saying we're doing things, but really being intentional around those communications. Once again, not able to share the specifics of what student discipline was administered, but as we work to share that it is being addressed and handled, and making sure that everyone has that level of awareness. Again, talking about with that gap of turnaround, ensuring that our students who are reporting or staff that is reporting incidents have that circle back to understand that our parents know that these matters have been addressed. This year, going into July, and I think the support of the board, we will be launching our Office of Student and Family Engagement. That is also one of our objectives, to say how do we better connect with our families and our students and our community. And so that is that development of that office. There will be a parent academy coming from that office, family liaisons, connect parents to resources within our community, especially when you look at mental health and wellness, but also the impacts of racial trauma, how that shows up, and what are some resources within our community that can really support our families and be a bridge for that. Community dialogue is so important. And so that is not just a one conversation and done, that is a continued. When we think about incidents, when we are Plymouth Canton Community Schools, this is not a PSEP incident, this is not a P-CCS situation, this is a community problem that we have to collectively work together to address if we are truly going to become the district that we strive to be for our students. When we look at what is reflected on our student this evening, the compassion, the empathy, that's what we want to be known for, because we want every experience of our students to truly reflect that. And so collectively having these conversations to ensure that we're working to cultivate the community that is inclusive and safe for all of our students. Our first community forum will take place on May 11th. I said it right because I said March last time. May 11th at 6 o'clock. This is at Discovery Middle School. This will be facilitated by Dr. Jay Marks, the Diversity and Equity Consultant with Oakland Schools, with Miss Virginia Winters, the School Culture and Equity Consultant with Wayne Risa. And both individuals have worked with our district through training over the years in this important work. We are inviting, again, extended invitations to our full school community, Board of Education, administrators, teachers, staff, our students. Their voice is so important, our elected officials, our community leaders, and just our overall families, parents, our overall school community to engage in conversations. Again, more information will be communicated about that. The work to audit our student handbook. So as we have our student handbook that our students and parents are responsible for reviewing and signing each year, we need to do the work this summer to ensure that consequences are appropriate for the actions that have occurred. We want to make sure that they're clear in terms of what consequences are. We want to be able to highlight then for our families and our students prior to signing at the beginning of the year any changes that we've made to update that to align with our policies, our procedures, our belief systems as it relates to what is acceptable within the walls of P-CCS. When we continue to say hate has no home here, then how does that look when we implement our code of conduct and our consequences around these actions? So that is something that is on the horizon. Continuing to review this hate and bias reporting form with our students, so that's really about the implementation of. We have this form. It's no good if students aren't using it, and we can't address issues if we don't know about them. There's also this side of trust. How do I know that I'm going to be safe? One, are you going to handle it? And two, will there be retaliation? So that's work in terms of our actions to regain our trust with our students in our community. And so continuing to talk about that tool, how is it used? How are you protected? And how do you get that information back that your concerns have been addressed? Again, when we talk about the training, refresher training with our administrators. As I said, our equity policy was just updated and approved on February 22nd. We are now, in the next couple of weeks, working with our administrators to go through that policy. There are some reporting requirements and just making sure that everyone is aware of the expectations for implementation at the policy level. So our next leaders meeting, as well as our individual leveled meetings that will take place, I think, May 3rd for elementary, May 10th for our middle school, working to finalize our high school administrators training in that area. And so that will take place in May. Continuing to work with external partners on additional anti-bias training for staff. And as I said earlier, listening to the comments of our students, making sure that we're including them in training as well. Big piece, a question that is asked from you to me is, how do you ensure that you are able to implement policies with fidelity? Two pieces come out of that: accountability, as I talked about, but also you're aligning financial resources to support that work. And so as we're looking to the training that is specific around racial incidents and how we're dealing with that, bias, hatred, having line items within that budget that are specifically around our restorative practices. We currently have the training as an inclusive line item, but making sure that we're calling out, and you'll see that as a part of the budget that's coming forward. Our curriculum and materials, the work that we do on that curriculum cycle, and making sure that we have intentional line items around that. Making sure that we're aligning our resources to support this important work of diversity, equity, inclusion. I will say that the investment of the position of Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion was a huge step for our district, but it's not Dr. Lilly's responsibility on her own. It's not one individual's responsibility. Again, it has to be a collective responsibility of our entire school district. And so that is you holding me accountable, again, me holding our building and central level administrators accountable, them holding our staff accountable in the building, and all of us students holding us accountable, because that's what we're here for. And so just wanted to give really a high level look at what we have done and what we will continue to do as we move forward. And again, we know we have not arrived until every student, our school district, can report feeling safe, again, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, feeling respected and valued. You'll hear me say often, the worst thing that we can do as adults is to have a student feel unheard or not valued, and we heard that at the last meeting. And so we all have to, again, we're stronger together, so continue to collectively work to listen to each other, and not just say we have all of the plans and all of the answers, but sharing plans and then getting feedback on saying how as we as a community can get stronger and better. So just thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share, and I look forward and invite all to that community forum, the first of many that will take place again on May 11th. And also we'll plan to update our school community just in a written form, but wanted to take an opportunity this evening to just kind of walk through that. So I will pause right now and see if maybe there are any questions that you may have of me. And if there's something you don't have this evening, but you think about, just I will definitely get back to you with that information.
Mr. Wilson?
When did we officially start to track race-based incidents in MyStar? Can you remind me?
So the initial work, 2013, is when we distinguished between where we were just saying incidents that were like a threatening behavior. So we put descriptors around discrimination. We have about 7 different categories. Most recently, it's the training around how to use that. So that's been within the last couple of years to say, to that first statement that I made, we have now delineated specific incidents so that we call them out for what they are in our form, but training to make sure that we're consistently using that. So although we began that work, I think in 2013, what we found is that we still didn't have a consistent implementation of the use of that coding. And so that's within this last, 2 years that we've been working on our administrators to make sure that they are appropriately within MyStar coding. Like, what is that definition of race-based trauma? What is that definition of descriptive or discriminative language? What is that definition of racial intimidation or harassment?
Right. So, thank you. So we should have some baseline data then that we can share at an upcoming meeting on race-based incidents in the schools, so that we can start to get that baseline data, so that we can start to track it. Right? Are these incidents going up? Are they going down? But I would love to, at a future meeting, have that presentation to the full board and the community, just so we can get an understanding of kind of where we are as we are today. And then, to your point, all of these other strategies that you're implementing, then we can start to see which ones are really taking hold and how we're impacting those numbers.
Yes, and I heard from you as well in terms of having that initial baseline, but then having that as an annual. So we'll make sure that that is annually a presentation that you receive as a Board of Education to have an awareness of and a tracking of how we are doing. And when we look at the implementation of these policies, the fidelity is how they're implemented in the local level.
Come on, Dr. Merritt.
I know. How about that? And how about that? That is actually that is a part of that work. Policy implementation. Can you say it? That's because I've been up writing about it till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning for the last few years, at that local level. And so being able to say what is the real impact of that.
Right. And then my second question or request was to have the race-based trauma presentation that the board received in a workshop, to have that actually at a full board meeting. I think it's important to educate the community on what the impacts and effects truly are, and something you may see as a microaggression, something that you may see as not being a big deal, but ultimately this is the impact that it's having on our students. This is how it creates an unsafe learning environment for them, and this is how it's causing trauma to them. And so I think that would be a really great presentation. I know the board, from my observation, was really appreciative of that, and it did a lot to help us better understand the psychological effects, because we're talking about that psychological impact, the social and emotional impact. So let's bring in an expert to truly help our community understand that.
Yes.
Ms. Chastain?
Dr. Merritt, a couple of things. Well, I wanted to follow up because Trustee Wilson was talking about the report, and you said bringing maybe like an annual report on the trauma. I would probably suggest twice a year. I think if we only look at it annually, it doesn't allow us to learn or pivot in real time. So I would want to see that data more than once a year. The other question that I have is, during your presentation, you talked about the form, which I think is different from okay to say,
Yes.
right? Is that form set up to allow students to report both primary and secondary sort of trauma, if it happened to me and if I observed it? Or is it just set up for students who are experiencing it?
It is both. And so just like we message with okay to say, if you see something, say something, that form allows for both, something that they have experienced and something that they have seen
The
or
new
witnessed.
form, and that is specific for students, right?
Yes.
And so the reporting that happens in MyStar, I'm thinking I'm at work, my chart. Okay, MyStar is specific for staff to report it.
Yes.
Is there criteria on when it should be reported? Because if it's subjective, some teachers might be like, that's not a big deal, and they never report it. So is there going to be very clear guidelines, or the expectation when this, kind of like a duty to report?
Yes,
That when it happens, you must report it.
yes.
And it shouldn't be too subjective. So I want to understand that a little
So I
bit
do
more.
want to clarify, my star is not the reporting mechanism for staff.
Okay.
My star is actually the portal that keeps or houses our student discipline.
Correct.
So that is not accessible to our teaching staff. That is for our administrators to report every incident. So, but for staff, the expectation, so if a student, as we heard, if a student reports to any staff, that staff has a requirement, as the language you use is just like a mandatory reporter. That staff has that requirement to report that forward. And even if somebody says, hey, I'm not comfortable dealing with that, we have to get comfortable because we are required to report everything that goes forward. So that would go to that building administrator to make sure that they then follow through. The building administrator, our deans, are responsible for the investigation of incidents, the follow through, and now the circle back to ensure that either the staff or the student that has reported that has that information that this has been addressed.
Understood. And then lastly, I think you mentioned this, but it was such a robust report out. You answered many of my questions throughout your report out, so thank you very much. I know that we are updating and have done a lot of work on our policies and our dynamic plan. Have we looked at, or are we, I'm asking, if we haven't, I'm asking that we look at the code of conduct specifically and make sure that the language and the consequences for the behaviors that are contradictory to the policies that we are putting forward is in existence in the code of conduct.
Yes, so when I use the language student handbook, that is our code of conduct. So that's exactly that piece that we need to do. That auditing of that code of conduct, which is our student handbook, to look specifically as we look at the dynamic plan, our policies and procedures, and what we say is acceptable. Does that consequence meet currently what we intend to for that to meet? Are there additional things? So if we even look at hate and bigotry or incidents of intimidation, again, as an educational institution, we could have a situation that is a first offense, and we say this is the consequence, but you need to participate in sensitivity training. Now, if you refuse to, then the consequence could look like this. So looking at really how we ensure that the consequence is appropriate, and at the same time that they're very clear to our students and our families.
And then lastly, and I'll yield the mic, is there a similar code of conduct or expectations for administrators, teachers, people who are responsible for our students?
So board policy is really what governs our employees. And so when we look at, there is an expectation for anyone that is employed in the district to follow board policy. In the absence of following board policy, there again are consequences that are associated with those. We also have that obligation to teach. So as we update board policies each week to ensure that staff is aware, because everybody, as they sign their contracts, there's that signature that says, or that point that says you're responsible for adhering to all board policies. And we want to make sure that we're ensuring that we are educating around any changes that are being made, and then again, holding everyone accountable to those policies.
Thank you.
Ms. Christensen?
Yeah, thank you for your thorough explanation of the timeline and everything that, sharing everything that the district is doing currently. A lot of my questions were also answered as you progressed through your report. But I had one wondering, what's the difference between the okay to say reporting and this new reporting mechanism, if we have both of these out there?
So that is a great question. The okay to say is the Michigan State Police. So that is a statewide reporting system. So anyone can report an incident that has occurred to them or that they have witnessed, that pings to the state, and then they contact the district. Most of those are anonymous by reporting, but we're still required to investigate and see, can we move forward. That's still in place. That is from state now, the requirement to put that on the IDs. Trying to get the idea around this form is that we've created internally is to address issues of hate, bias, that kids may be experiencing, working to get students to actually identify because of the limited number of access or people that have access to that, trusting that that fear of retaliation is not there. So we have a mechanism to get this information, to investigate, to close the loop on that. But again, that must be uploaded into MyStar, any consequences that are given. So that is really trying to make this tool more friendly and user-friendly for students and staff, but also making sure that the information is getting to us directly as a school district. But we still encourage the okay to say, so we'll always communicate that as well, but also really educating our students on the use of this form.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I also appreciate the rollout of this. It sounds like you thought about not just making an announcement, but having a real campaign around getting the word out about this form. So if I experience something or if I see something as a student, I know where I can find that form.
So I want to give credit to our students as well. So as we as adults, we say, hey, this is the plan and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a video so that we can, as the adults, share that this is the practice. And then we're going to, work within, we have this, we're going to work within this ESSA block, and we'll work with teachers and staff so that they can help. But then in those engagements over the last couple of weeks with our students, they're like, hey, guess what? Kids aren't about to listen to announcements and might not listen to you as the adults. So what would be a good way to do this is including us in that conversation. So I thought that was really just great to listen to them and then follow through. Like, how would we look to them if we still move forward and say, oh, no, we're just going to put our video out because that is our plan. But even hearing from students, so in particular, this communication or the video that was shared at PSEP, we were working with some students that had come forward here, some students that are leaders within the Black Student Union, and we even heard from other students today. We've had reports from teachers that are also saying we want to make sure that our voices are included in the conversation, so really being intentional to reach all students and include students in their voice and engagement. So there's conversation at the PSEP level of working around basically a symposium for students that'll allow just a day that's dedicated to training and resources and opportunities for their voices to be heard, and have them help to really organize what that looks like for students, what that day looks like for students. So really trying to actively engage that objective of student voice and really listening to them for what they need in their learning experiences. And they're so incredible. They really do. They really are.
Mr. Kehoe?
Thank you. My fellow board members have both answered a number of my questions, as well as Ms. Merritt, but also caused me to have some other questions. The first thing I wanted to just, what I observed in this hate and bias reporting form is that it is easily accessible on a computer as well as a smartphone. And so that makes it easy for people to get to this. You don't have to download an app. It's just a simple link to be able to get to. And so on any device that people have access to, it makes it easy for them to report that. The other thing that I noticed on this is it's not just for students to report. It also can be used for parents that are reporting incidents on their behalf as part of that process, or even things that they see on social media platforms. So it isn't just a first reporter or a witness. It's really designed to capture any incident of hate or bias that we see out there.
Yes.
So that was just my observation on this process. My question was on just a clarification for the people in the audience as well as those that are looking at home. We oftentimes talk about why we can't share information about the incident or information about the discipline. And can you just provide some context for everybody here as to why we don't do that or why we can't do that?
So we are guided under FERPA, and we are not legally allowed to discuss an individual student's record. So if we can do a better job in communicating, especially while trust is still broken, so when we say it's been addressed, does that say, oh, people are not taking this seriously? No, we will not. Because of FERPA, we're not able to, even like if you think about our board meetings, if someone specifically talks about or brings up a student name, and we have to stop that because we will be in violation if we're discussing that student record. However, we can discuss kind of just have the conversation at policy. How can we strengthen that language around what does address look like? Suggestion was to say, linking the actual student code of conduct. So if we say this is addressed in accordance with the student code of conduct, linking to say, what are the potential consequences that take place in this set environment? And I do believe that the culture over time, it will take time to get that trust back. If we're communicating, circling back, and people are seeing, don't know what has happened, but knowing that it is addressed will build that confidence that things are, we're holding everyone accountable to this.
Great. And so just on that particular one, just for the audience, FERPA is?
Help me, the federal.
Family
Yeah,
Educational
family
Rights and Privacy
Yes.
Act.
So it's a federal law that governs the fact that we are not allowed to share the details about these things. It's
Yes,
a
so-
Privacy Act is part of that.
It's kind of the opposite in schools for where we're used to hearing HIPAA. So how you're required not to talk about medical records, family educational, we're not allowed to talk about educational records of students.
Great. So that's really important that this is not something that is a policy that we're doing. This is a law that we're conforming to, and that's why we're not disclosing that information.
That is correct.
The second part of that conversation, though, I think that's important as well, is we oftentimes are vague about the incident. Yeah. And we don't disclose the details around that. Can you provide some context around that?
When we look at incidents, if you'll hear local law enforcement involved, if there's an active police investigation, we are not allowed to discuss the details because that could interfere with the investigation. So we'll try to use words very intentionally. So if at where we use the term hate speech, right, without giving details that could potentially compromise that investigation. When we look at the December 9th, I know that was frustrating, but we couldn't release the families. We could say, hey, this is what occurred high level, but until this investigation is closed, we can't give you specific details. And there will be a time, sometimes when we're able to say, not addressing the student in that discipline, but specifically what was taking place. So if something has gone forward to a prosecutor and there is a charge, that could be information that comes out.
Or if the police investigation is closed,
Yes.
we can then provide those details?
Depends. And so, yes, more details around a closed investigation, but it might be that a threat was determined not to be imminent, or, what was that specific threat? We still have some parameters in terms of what we can say.
Okay, so it's just, that might be useful to create an FAQ or something else to help people understand that, because in our desire to be transparent, we sometimes come across as very opaque.
Yes.
And I think that being able to explain to people why we can't do these things would be helpful for them to understand both the legal requirements as well as the investigation reasons why we can't share that information.
So that is great. I'm glad you raised that. We are currently in the process of creating an FAQ. So we've taken many of the questions that came even here around this incident at the board meeting, what I received an email, because these are questions that, as you said, our answer is vague and people don't know why. In the absence of knowing why, it just feels as if we're not trying to address it or we're being complacent. And so taking those questions, getting an answer, but also running that then through our legal to make sure that our answers we're saying what we're allowed to say, but at least giving a clear explanation of, like, what is that example of FERPA and what does this mean? What is a statutory requirement versus because it's an open police investigation?
Thank you. And then the other question that came up was a result of one of the other board questions that we had, and it was around the staff and the people that were here. And you said that they have to comply to board policy. And one of the things that I have a question about is board policy is relatively high level. Board policy, as my understanding, gets implemented into procedures. And those procedures are the operational processes that are used by the district to execute those policies. How are those procedures codified or shared with the staff so that they're in compliance with that? And are they in compliance with the policy, or are they in compliance with the procedures?
So it is both. So those are administrative guidelines. So your policy is the what you as Board of Education, you have policy as it dictates the use of our email system, or, certain things that we are allowed to do, reporting mechanism. All of those are policy. Then the how we implement that are administrative guidelines. And all of those are available on the website for everyone to know. What we have talked about is, so we can say it's an expectation, there's collective bargaining agreements, there's certain procedures that are in place, and we can say it's an expectation that everyone knows as a condition of employment, but what we're talking about is being more intentional about educating. What does that look like? So what is that administrative guideline? How are you expected to carry out this policy? What are the consequences for not following this policy? Again, education of, if we're holding you accountable to. If there are new changes, new policies, and new administrative guidelines that go with those policies, how are we educating our staff on those? So even in the past, we had done a piece with our leaders meeting where we were face-to-face, and so at every leaders meeting on the agenda, we were going over the new policies with our administrators that you approved here at the board level, and if there was any tweak to our administrative guidelines, we would share at that time, and then the idea was then for them to communicate that same thing at the building level. And that has been, that has paused since we've been virtual with our meetings, but that's something that we're talking about getting back on track again, because if we're holding people accountable, we need to make sure that they understand and they're educated on those procedures.
So that's great. And that makes a
and
lot-
also, if I can, we just had this conversation in policy as well, where we also talked about policy. Part of the goal of policy or the role of policy is to institutionalize certain practices. And so as a board, we have an opportunity to look at policies and say, what do we need to institutionalize to ensure that the guidelines are followed in this situation. So I think there's another layer that we can really look at to strengthen our policies beyond just staying up here but saying, no, there's some things that's in the best interest from a safety standpoint of the district that we need to institutionalize as a board in order to ensure that this occurs.
Yeah, and just to add to that, since we just met in policy to discuss this, one of the things I asked Dr. Merritt was to give us an update on the administrative guidelines to our policy that was recently adopted. Because our first wondering in policy is, where are the gaps? And Dr. Merritt pointed out, hey, we just approved this in February. My team is in the process of the implementation of that. So I asked her to give us an update on the administrative guidelines and the implementation of that policy and where the gaps are. So within, at the next meeting, I'm hoping that she could give us an update on where that is, where she is with the implementation, and what gaps is she finding in the administrative guidelines.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of
and are those administrative guidelines meeting the intent
Right.
of the policy,
And-
which is important.
And both of those make a lot of sense to me. I guess the question I have, we have a student handbook. Do we have an employee handbook?
So that is also one of our goals, is to, from the HR department, when you look at our dynamic plan, and that action plan for year one is the creation of an employee handbook.
Okay. And then as part of that, one of the things that I see in the corporate world, we oftentimes do a lot of work on cybersecurity training. And there's a requirement as part of that process. Every year you have to go through the cybersecurity training. And you have to then take a test at the end of it to make sure that you're in compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And that process makes sure that it reinforces not only what's written in the handbook, but the policies and procedures that our employees are expected to conform to every single day.
Yes.
Is there something that we can, and we probably need to do that from a cybersecurity perspective, but more importantly, can we do that on the important aspects that are part of our employee handbook around things like these policies that we're having on hate and bias?
Yes, so I'm going to ask Mr. Tiskowitz to give you a high level. We do this every year.
Yeah, well, there are a number of modules that we provide to our staff yearly, and it's condition of employment that they must complete those modules every year, and those are things that we're doing annually.
So
Is
we look at, like,
Hate and bias and racism part of that?
There's a list of them. I'd have to look them up.
Can we get a list?
Sure.
Okay.
Cultural
you.
competency is a part of that.
yes.
Pardon me?
They said cultural competency is a part of that, which is
Okay.
a little bit different than anti-racism.
Right.
Um,
Come up to the microphone, Dr. Larry.
So some of the work that we've been looking at in the last few weeks, as we, again, make sure our administrative guidelines are paired closely with our policy, again, to what you were asking with regard to, like, it's called Safe Schools, as Mr. Siskowitz shared. And so there are components around implicit bias, microaggressions, and those components that will be a part of the mandatory trainings. Last year, and I think Dr. Brady actually presented at one of our workshops, was some of the course requirements that she's and her team have actually built as well around microaggressions, implicit bias, and anti-racism. And so looking at pairing those together, so you have the Safe Schools component, which also gives like the test at the end with some of the asynchronous work that Dr. Brady and her team are doing. So if you are, for example, not present, if you are, say for instance, whatever, not in attendance, it's archived to make sure that you are required to do it regardless of when you're hired, so on and so forth.
And Mr. Tiskowitz continues to send emails when they're not done.
Yes.
And I've been recipients of those emails. If you
Are
guys-
those customized by the district, or are they generic questions that you question bank?
They're provided by our insurance carrier, SETSEG, that, I'll give you a rundown, like bloodborne pathogens, seclusion restraint, Title IX compliance, AED, cybersecurity, FERPA, first aid, epinephrine, auto-injectors, sexual harassment, youth suicide, CPR, password security basics, protection against malware. Those are just some of the examples that we provide.
I'm just wondering for this one if it's something that the district could customize.
Yes, so to that end, Dr. Brady and I have talked several times around her team actually building one around anti-racism, social justice, implicit bias, and making sure there's that circle back and follow up to make sure that those courses have been taken. And so, and you all know Dr. Brady, so she makes sure that every person has taken the course in the way in which it's supposed to, and then what's the follow up behind that.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. And then it would be good to see that full list, though, and see what we might be adding to that as part of the process. The last question I have was, as we're doing all this work, how does this apply to our vendors, to our transportation teams, to our custodians, to our coaches, to people that are
Security
directly
personnel.
security, the people that are either directly or indirectly employed and employed by the district or working with our students.
So that is the key. Anybody that is working with our student, whether a third party or employed through P-CCS, are included in our trainings. And so, yes, so they are included in our
Okay.
training. So it's a rollout type of scenario where we'll say we're doing administrators first, we're doing teachers next, we're doing support staff. We might bring the secretarial group in to do implicit bias training. Then we go to transportation and make sure that and that was most recently, I think that was one group of individuals that were working with our students that initially had not received training. And so there was an incident, if you recall, on a bus. And so Director Meyer actually went to transportation and said, we need to get this training and make sure that we're getting them included as well. So we've done a good job with all others, and then that's something that we've now included to make sure any adult that has interaction with our students receives all of the same training.
And so I assume that would mean our custodians, even though they may not have direct normal interaction, they may be present at after-school activities or anything like that, so
They
they'll
are
be included.
still working with students.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for those questions,
Yes.
for the answers.
Ms. Sadhu?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. You mentioned a lot of training that you and the staff are putting together and are going through. And restorative practices training is one of those that have been going around for at least 4 or 5 years. I know there was a pause during the pandemic. With regard to all the training that you mentioned, could we get an update on what percentage of the staff are trained in which training opportunities you mentioned, just so we know with the implementation of that, have we reached 50% of the staff or 75? So we as a board know how much more support we need to provide to get that going.
Yes, we will.
The other question I know has come up a couple of times with, do the students know the difference between OK to Say and this new form? Is that something that is being worked out through ESSA?
Yes, and that's just not ESSA, so ESSA is high school, so
Right.
that's where we're beginning, and then going back to middle school and then elementary school. So that, a couple of forms, we have OK to Say, there's a tip line that was just internal at the high school, And so we want to, even with talking with the students, really more training on this particular form, still knowing okay to say is use, but no, I would say as we're working to implement and roll out, there's training that needs to take place with students and families on what it is and how to use it.
Okay. Last question with regard to student support, particularly supporting students based on these kind of situations that they're experiencing. Do we have staff that are trained in supporting students with racial trauma? And if not, is that an investment that the board needs to make sure that students have the adequate support? Because when you look at social workers, school psychologists, they have a specialty.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that our students are getting the adequate support for this.
Yeah, so actually, engaging with Ms. Graham, she's already agreed that next wave of training, the group of staff members that will be trained are our social workers, behavior specialists, psychologists, those student support, and counselors. So we'll receive that training from her.
Ongoing training or one-time?
So ongoing, so when we think about, we have a lot of employees, and so we want to make sure that we get everyone the initial training. We have to also make space for new employees. As you see, we're oftentimes hiring throughout the district, so that's a gap that's identified. So if we say we've already trained administrators and then we bring on 5 middle school deans like we did this year, we need to make a space to have that training. But then annual training has to continue to take place. You want to add?
And just adding on, so I remember at one time there was a concern, like when we did the microaggressions and implicit bias training with the Michigan Roundtable, that was a quote-unquote one and done. And so what we then do, so we will have a facilitator come in, and then we take the work. So if you recall, Dr. Brady and I then took the work to a different level and had all staff training, just reinforcing what those facilitators did. So sometimes it may be a perception that we're bringing people in one time, but then we're able to take their work and then embed it, whether it's through PLCs, staff department meetings, so on and so forth. So it may appear to be one time, but it's not.
I think that's critical to understand, because if
Yes.
I'm really honest, folks, I think you started at 2015 and you went through at least 10 different training types of opportunities or things that staff has been engaged in. And as I'm listening to it ad nauseum, it just sounds like we're training for the sake of training. I know that might not be the intent, but if the training isn't a response to a strategy, like we're trying to get somewhere and we're just training, it falls on deaf ears, if you want me to be 100% honest. And so, and it actually devalues the work that's actually being done.
Thank you for that feedback.
That's it for my questions.
So most of my questions were answered. I know you talked about, like, at the PSUP campus, have you engaged with the students to see what they wanted or needed? Is that a plan for the elementary and middle school students also?
Yeah, so we need to continue to work through that because we've engaged with one group of students, and so even we want to make sure that we're very intentional to reach all students. We want to make sure initially this work at PSEP immediate because of the repeated incidents that have been occurring, and then move to the middle school level. And the conversations, the education also will be paired differently based on the level of the student. And so, yes.
That's good, because as we're gonna talk about later, student voice is really super important. And usually if you ask the kids, they can tell you what they need, what they're seeing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I have other questions, but I will wait for when you bring back some of your other stuff to ask.
All right.
Because they might be answered then.
All right.
But I do want to say, I do echo what Member Chastain said about training, especially when those are on like required PD days. If you don't find a real value, you tend to you click through it to get done. And that's not a valuable use of anybody's time.
And actually, there's some recent research that's been talked about, and I'll try to get the article, that actually shows some of this can backfire if you don't do it with fidelity and through systems that are sustainable. And so we don't want this to backfire. So one thing is, yes, they'll click through it. But the other is, this could be harmful in the exact opposite way that we're intending if we're not strategic about it. And I think that's what the point was that Member Chastain was making in terms of being really strategic and thoughtful and connecting it to our current systems.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We are down to finance and operations. So the first thing up is consider approval of resolution for the purchase of 50 elementary Chromebook carts. This is a first reading, and I see Mr. Salzer is making his way up.
Again? Just teasing.
Good evening. Tonight, we're bringing to you a resolution to do a change-out of a portion of our elementary classroom cart fleet. These are ones that we've had for a number of years. They've served a good purpose, but now, as we are retiring the devices that were tailored for them, we are looking to bring relief to those classrooms and bring a smaller footprint cart for them, and we're asking for your consideration of this resolution at this time. Happy to answer questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions?
We spoke about this extensively in F&O.
I have a cart that looks like this in my classroom, and it really is a lot more space saving in a classroom. It's I really do like it. Pardon me?
Yeah, there's a picture in the
There's a
second slide.
picture, if you go down.
Can you scroll down, please?
They slide in.
And these ones are set up so that they're not specific to a particular device. As we upgrade devices and we change them, they'll be easier for us to use the same card even with a mixture of different devices.
Thank you.
Which is super important as things become obsolete.
Yes.
Or supply chain.
Great.
And if you scroll down to, I don't know, the third or fourth page where we have pricing, appreciate going to the state REMC save bid to actually get a discount on top of the education price, so saving us a lot more money, so thank you for that.
Trying.
Mark is all about saving money.
I know he is.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next up, we have action item 220467, consider approval of resolution for bid package EL2 Phase 3 furnishings, final reading. I am looking for a motion.
Madam President, I move that we consider approval of a resolution for bid package number EL2, Phase 3 furnishings, final reading, action item number 22-04-67.
All right, I'm looking for a second.
Second.
All right, been moved by member Christensen and seconded by member Kehoe. Does anybody have any questions? We did discuss this at our last meeting. All right, seeing none, call for the vote. All in favor say yes.
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 Any opposed say no. All right. And then next up is action item 220466. Consider
68.
I'm sorry, 68. Consider a resolution for the approval to purchase the Pilot Drive property. Final reading. I'm looking for a motion.
Madam President, I move that we consider a resolution for the approval to purchase the Pilot Drive property. This is a final reading. The action item is 220468.
Thank you. I'm looking for a second.
Second.
Was that you, Ms. Chastain?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Making sure. It was moved by member Kehoe and seconded by member Chastain that we consider a resolution for approval to purchase the Pilot Drive property. Final reading. Does anybody have any questions on this? All right.
Just express my excitement for being able to move forward with this.
Yes. So I will call for the vote. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed say no. All right. All right. Thank you very much. Next up is citizens' comments. There are none in the box. So we will move on. And then we are on to we are on to F, which is discussion. First up is student-centered innovation project. Mr. Wilson,
Fantastic, thank you.
you should have your seat.
Nick is going to serve as my Vanna White. Thank you, Nick. So I think this, obviously the Board of Education knows that this is a proposal that's been in the works for quite a while, really, which aligned with the budget process, but I think it's taken on a different sense of urgency in light of some of the recent incidents in the district. And so I'm excited to bring this forward to the Board of Education. You know, one of my favorite quotes, I've been doing youth work for nearly 30 years, and one of my favorite quotes in doing youth work is, "Do nothing about me without me." And so often in these positions, we're pushing down solutions to our students, to our youth, versus really including them and incorporating them in the decision making and the co-creation of the decisions as well. So tonight, what I'll be walking through is really a recommendation to the Board of Education to establish a student voice and action committee to help us tackle some of the toughest issues as a board that we're wrestling with, everything from equity to closing the achievement gap and obviously race-based incidents. And you know, this is really an opportunity to engage the underrepresented, often marginalized students in our district to help us solve many of these issues. So we'll kind of talk through the role of the Board of Education, the need for student voice, and then outline a rough scope and timeline, and then open it up for questions. Next slide, please. We've seen this slide many times, but ultimately the role of the Board of Education really focuses on policy, setting the vision, of course allocating the resources through budget, curriculum, and then of course we have one employee, which is Dr. Merritt. But at the center of all that work is student achievement and experiences, which I think is important. Next slide, please. How we do our work: public board meetings, obviously, community engagement, surveys, emails, school visits, events, and board committees. And so the recommendations that we actually establish a new board level committee, the Student Voice and Action Committee. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that would mean. Next slide, please. Strategic themes, Dr. Merritt hit on this earlier, which, you know, the board, as we're looking to go through the strategic planning process, the dynamic planning process, we established the vision for the district. And to Dr. Merritt's point, one of the very first pillars that we established was equity and inclusion grounded in social justice and anti-racism. But obviously, when you look at all of the pillars, there's one consistent word in each of those pillars, which is students, 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 students. But if you go to the next slide, I think there's a gap in how we actually get there as a Board of Education. Students are not engaged across the full spectrum in a way that they can, and different types of student voice, and I'll kind of hit on that. I'll share a slide on that. The board really doesn't have direct feedback from the students. There's usually some kind of filtration system in there if it's a survey or something of that nature. But you know, if we truly want to include youth voice and action and policy and in the work of the board, we have to have that direct interaction with the students. And to Dr. Merritt's point, you know, as I visited Pioneer Middle School a couple months ago, that direct feedback was so powerful to me. And I think the entire Board of Education will benefit from having that direct link to our students, because they are remarkable, as we all know. And then there's no feedback loop. So if you really think about it, we're establishing these policies, we're doing all of this work, and there's not a direct feedback loop for us to hear directly from the students on how this policy or the board's work impacted them, both positively and negatively, right? And so, you know, establishing this committee to help us do that. And then finally, once again, I think there's a gap and there's an opportunity for us to engage students authentically as co-creators of these solutions. So do nothing about me without me, right? Next slide, please. This was a chart, types of student voice. You know, I think as a district, we do a good job, you know, to a certain extent. I mean, we survey our students annually. We do those different types of, you know, expression, consultation, participation. But I think what's missing is that partnership, that activism, that leadership, the co-planning, the co-execution. You know, that's where there's really an opportunity for us to establish a stronger link to student voice. Next slide, please. some of the benefits. And this, you know, if you really think about a lot of the student comments that we've heard recently, you know, this really hits on a lot of that. Transparency, communication, inclusivity. It also helps to strengthen our relationships with our student body, which is really important. And then even from a shared vision standpoint, you know, that's the key. So if we're going to attack, and by the way, obviously some of these topics, the equity, closing the gap, you know, achievement gap, race-based sensitive, those are just some of the issues that this student body, that this committee, Student Voice and Action Committee, have an opportunity to address. But those are really important components, right? But if you think about what we've been talking about tonight, we're really talking about disrupting racism, disrupting race-based incidents in our school district. And in order to do that, we're going to have to attack it at every level. At the policy level with the board, the administration level, the school building level, the parent level, the student level. And so that's the only way we're going to do it. There has to be a shared vision in order to accomplish that goal. If it's just the board attacking it, we're not going to solve this issue. If it's just Dr. Merritt attacking it, we're not going to solve this issue. So we're going to have to attack these issues on literally every level of the board. And what I love about this committee is that it really connects the students, you know, to the quote unquote top of the you know, district ladder, if you will. Next slide, please. So the initial scope of work, and I'm always hesitant on this because once you start over prescribing what the students are going to do, you actually lose student voice, right? But as I was, you know, talking to a couple board members, they said, but what could that look like? And so begrudgingly, I put some ideas here. But once again, it's really up to the students to help lead this work and to create the work as part of this committee. So everything from data projects, right, where they're intimately involved with those data projects, these key issues, and they're helping to present solutions around it to, and you know, potentially maybe the students want to do an annual equity summit, right, which the board can support. And it doesn't just cover school level issues at that summit, but also policy level issues at that summit as well. Communication strategies, you know, I think Dr. Merritt hit the nail on the head. You know, we can, you know, put out videos if we want, but the truth is engaging our student body as the content creators of that messaging is probably a smarter way for us to go. And then, you know, we have different student bodies at different levels, but is there one body that's helping to really convene, to really help to create that shared vision, and who is that body? So, you know, these are just some of the ways that this committee can really work. And then ultimately the big initial scope is for them to develop a student agenda and a budget, right, and present it to the Board of Education for approval. So I want to pause there for a moment if you go back, because one of the pitfalls of student voice, of student work, of youth voice, youth work, is it's like an unfunded mandate, right? So if you ask anyone, should we have students at the table? Everybody says yes. Absolutely, we should have them at the table. And then when you say, okay, well, it's going to cost us X amount. Well, no, wait, hold up. Well, really, that much? They need that much to do X, Y, Z? So I'm going to challenge our you know, Board of Education to, if we do this, we need to commit to putting real resources behind the students. We have to commit to putting real resources and dollars behind their solutions. Otherwise, we're actually going to further disenfranchise them, right? Because if they come to the table with solutions and there's no resources to implement it, then we just alienating them again, and we can't do that. So I did want to pause because I've seen this go wrong so often, where the best intentions are set, but then there's no resources behind it, and then it loses all momentum. Next slide, just to kind of look at the scope. I believe this is how pretty much all of our committees are structured. Of course, you have the Board of Education, you have the Superintendent, and then you would have that committee. So this could be the SPA committee, the policy committee, the F&O committee, whatever the committee is, right there. And then it's made up of Board of Education members, usually a chair, And then you have the student leaders or community in this case, right? In this case, it's the student leaders. And the recommendation would be to have students from both middle school and high school. And by the way, that was a suggestion that when I was at Pioneer Middle School, I was having a conversation. I said, you know, I kind of threw this out there randomly on the fly, and they said you should have someone from middle and high school so that there's kind of this continuum pipeline, which I thought was very, very sharp. And then, of course, district staff liaison as appointed by Dr. Merritt. Rough timeline. Would love and hope that the board would approve this in May. Student Voice and Action Committee. And then ultimately open up the application process. You know, it would be up to the Board of Education and the staff liaison to really start to work on that. And I would also include students on the early, onset, right? What kind of questions should we be asking, things of that nature. And then release a RFP. So once the committee is formed, once again, another best practice is to actually bring in a third-party consultant to truly represent the student voice, right? So that they feel that they have a true adult advocate. It can be very intimidating if you're a youth to, try to truly elevate your voice to adults. But if you have another adult whose their sole purpose is to advocate on your behalf for this, that really goes a long way. And so the recommendation would be one of the first things we do is to put our RFP out, hire a consultant who can actually work with the youth on helping establishing this agenda and budget, along with the committee. So they will be a part of that committee, but they will be that safe place for the student or the student group to be able to go to. And then ultimately, fast forward to December, you select a consultant, you work with the committee to come up with a student agenda, and then once again, a student agenda aligned with the budget, and present that to the board in December for approval. Obviously, we want this agenda to align with the dynamic plan. So, as a committee, we're able to help give guidance and coaching to the youth to make sure that they're aligning with the pillars that the board have set out, and to make sure that it's not drifting into the weeds, but that it's truly serving its purpose as a student voice, directly to the Board of Education. So, and that's pretty much it. I'll open it up for questions.
Some questions.
Yes.
So, on the application, are you imagining getting this done, the application process started before the end of the school year? Because that's the way you would reach the most of your students while they're still in school. And then who decides and what would be the criteria for getting on to the committee so that we don't just get, because so often you see committees formed and it's the same students who may or may not be representative of the broader population.
Absolutely.
And we want to make sure if we're going to do this, that we are getting representation of all of our students and all of their voices, so it's not just the same kids who will step up and volunteer.
Absolutely. No, and I think part of this is bringing that criteria to the board for feedback to make sure that we're getting that cross-representation, that diverse representation that the board would want to hear from. So LBG, there's a, are there students who are, on IEPs, right? So I think there's a lot of different categories that we'd be looking at from this when you're looking at closing the achievement gap and things of that nature. So it's not very singular. But to answer your question in short, yes, part of what I would envision is bringing this to the board to make sure that every board member has an opportunity to weigh in on the type of voice that they'd want to hear from on this committee.
And is there any thought to maybe including, like, you have, fifth graders are almost up into the middle school.
Yes.
To include, some of those children also. If we're going to be asking, they have great insight into elementary school, and then also what they're looking, what do you fear in middle school? What are you looking forward to in middle school?
Absolutely. I think fifth grade, you know, I have 4 kids in the district, right? And I think fifth grade is proven to be the most challenging year. It feels like, I don't know why, but to your point, yeah, absolutely. And you know, once again, this is a framework. I think it's up to the board to weigh in with those kind of suggestions so that we can make sure that it's truly a board committee.
Sean,
Your,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
mine is just a real easy question this time.
Well, let's go
Trustee
with
Kehoe.
Trustee Chast.
Yeah, I was like, you might want to get me before you get to Trustee Kehoe. In your research, I mean, because we wouldn't be the first district doing this. This isn't new, right? There are other districts across the country who have done it. In your research, did you find that there's a recommended size for a committee this size? And it's just a yes or no, because as I'm thinking about what it could look like, also making sure that it's meaningful and that they can do something impactful and sustainable, and not just a bunch of parents wanting to make sure their kids get on the committee because it looks good on their application. So just being even more thoughtful about the size of the committee.
I can tell you just from personal experience establishing different youth life committees, that 5 to 7 mark feels or has proven successful initially. But once again, the key to that is making sure that those 5 to 7 are connected to the other bodies within the district, so that there's a broader representation in that 5 to 7. Right. But if you get beyond 5 to 7, it's really hard to really make it a meaningful experience for each of those students as well.
That aligns with my experience, a maximum of 10, but those students have to be connected to the fifth graders and to the other groups to make sure
to the
we
Black
hear
Student
that voice.
Union, to the Student Council at Pioneer, to the, right.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Kehoe, I yield my time to you, sir.
You asked my question.
That was
So that was.
Was that your question?
That was my question. So
Yeah.
Nice.
the related question to that
I
is,
knew it.
the related question on that is, how do we make this more than just those 5 to 7? Is it connected to the student councils? Is it separate from the student councils? You know, how do we make it so that we have a mechanism that is a broader mechanism to have students be able to provide that feedback, and perhaps even have, you know, you've got 5 to 7, but maybe they're not always fixed. Of the same 5 to 7, maybe they're changing over a period of time, so you hear different voices through this this process, and people have a chance to be represented. I mean, there's definitely value in continuity, but there's also value in seeing different voices. So I don't know if there's been any thought to that, or you know, or is that something that we're going to be prescriptive on, or something that the students themselves would make suggestions on?
So, spot on. So I think that's one of the questions you ask the students to solve for, right? But understanding that you're giving them the framework of, you know, how might this body connect to, you know, all student bodies within the district, right? So as we're just talking about the Black Student Union, or the you know, Student Council at Pioneer, or you know, I forget who came to give a presentation, but she mentioned that she was the educator, the teacher, mentioned that she was starting back up. I think it was a equity council. I can't, but that was at the elementary level, right? And so I think being intentional about a couple things. One, on the front end, help making sure that whatever the student agenda is inclusive of those bodies' voices up front, so there's a shared vision, is critical, because you can't go to them afterwards and say, these 5 to 7 students are speaking on all your behalf. We really have to figure out a way to make sure that all of those bodies have been included in this. But that's those students going out to those bodies and having those visioning sessions and things of that nature. So I think if you do that, then you come back, that student body comes back, and they're able to work towards their agenda together. That's how we make sure that it's not just the handful that were selected for this, but that it really represents a broader you know, movement within the district.
Great. And then my other question, my next question was on a follow-up on what Patty mentioned, on the timing of this. You know, trying to do this in May, and if we're going to really recruit people that you want to have work in the summer, then we have to get this publicized before people leave for the summer. And that was actually one of my concerns, is that, you know, I see the timeline. Our goal is to have people in June and August, and I know people are looking to take vacations.
Yep.
And I know that they're looking to travel and to do other things. So obviously, I think we have to find a way to make sure that we're flexible
Absolutely.
in this, because we wouldn't want to exclude people because they've got other plans or other things as part of this. We may end up having to initiate and start the process, but not be able to do all the formal things until September, depending on the students that we have here.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we have to be flexible on that. The initial thought process was to build to establish the infrastructure, if you will, June and August, the selection process, getting the RFP out, to be able to get a consultant in place. And then obviously in September is when the real work starts, right? So once the students actually come back, we can do that. But, you know, I have no qualms about saying we're going to select, we're going to do what we can over the summer, but we're really going to formally kick it off, but you know, in the fall. But I would like to kind of think through that a little bit more once approved with the students to see what their thoughts are on the timeline.
Okay. I have other questions, but
Yep.
I'll let others ask.
Can I step in and just follow up on Member Kehoe's questions with regard to the timeline? With the end of the school year quickly approaching, you know, one of my concerns is getting the message out to the students on what this is, what it would entail, the time commitment, and encouraging them to apply, given that everything is coming up in May and June, prom and end of the school year, and to Member Kehoe's point, summer jobs and commitments that are already in place. So just wondering if the board could do more work in terms of looking at my second question, accountability, and building an accountability system to track the return on investment and looking at the impact of this. How do we measure the impact of this? So my wondering is if the board could do some work in June and July and put this out there for students as they come back in the fall. As they normally do, they have all of these opportunities to join clubs. I believe every August, September, new clubs are forming, new year, and that might be an opportunity to get fresh set of eyes, kids who are excited about the new school year, and then get all of the other things moving forward.
Yep. So I'll answer in two parts. So I think once again, the first question about pushing it back kind of to the fall, no problem. I think I'd be comfortable with that. The second part, though, is I feel you going down the slippery slope of overprescribing. Let the board do more work. Let the board put more infrastructure in place. And I think we want to put enough structure in place to be able to guide the students, but we don't want to do the work that the students would be doing, because they'll pick up on that really quick if we have our agenda on this, right, versus really empowering them, because the metrics are going to be based on their agenda. You're going to measure the ROI based on their agenda and how they accomplish those agendas. So
what's the data that we're looking at? Because you talked about the opportunity gaps, the equity gaps. So could that be a data point that we look at and see if we make a dent on that and some of the other things that you mentioned on the first slide?
Yeah, I mean, but it's all based off their agenda. You understand what I'm saying? So we can give them the broader framework to say these are some of the things we really want your input on. So yeah, absolutely, we can look at those data points to see how they're helping to move the needle in collaboration with us. But the real ability to gauge it and to measure it is once they've set their agenda, and then that's part of the process as well. Is how are they measuring, their agenda as well? And we're looking at from an agreement standpoint, saying yes, this sounds good, because it's still a committee, but our role on that committee as Board of Education is guidance, coaching, mentoring, things of that nature. So I know it's tough, but it's one of those things where we really don't want to overprescribe to them a lot of that work, and we have to trust the process, right? And go through it, and it's an iterative process as well, because my goal and hope would be that the board wouldn't look at this as a one-time, well, let's do this for a year. No, let's really make a commitment, and hopefully that's what they'll come back with, is requesting a multi-year commitment from the board, which aligns with our multi-year dynamic plan.
Yeah, I don't think we should support it if it's viewed as an ad hoc committee.
Correct.
It has to be integrated
Absolutely.
into it, or we shouldn't do it at all.
I totally agree.
Agreed.
Ms. Christensen, do you have questions?
A lot of the questions were asked by my fellow board members here. What I hear you saying, it sounds like what we're trying to do oftentimes in our classroom, and I'm looking to Ms. Rail, our teachers, we're asking them not to be the sage on the stage any longer. We're asking them to be the guide on the side. And it seems like we're even putting this into practice within this committee. So to me, I think that aligns so well even with our curricular goals, which is really exciting. From a timing standpoint, you know, for example, F&O, we meet twice a month. We get together every other week. Other committees get together once a month. What are we thinking from a time commitment standpoint that this committee would meet?
Yep, once again, you know, I think that's gonna be up to that committee.
Okay.
But I will say one of the important points of why we do need to make sure that we're committed to allocating the resources is we wanna make sure that we're allocating resources that would remove any barriers from those students being able to participate, whether it's dinner, transportation, any of those things, and because that's also going to guide kind of the frequency of how often they meet.
Sure.
So just from, you know, the standpoint of, I understand you don't want to make it too prescriptive,
Yep.
but when you're asking students, you know, would you like to do this? One of the questions is going to be, well, what is going to be the time commitment? When is it going to meet? I mean, and parents are going to have those questions also.
Right.
So even if they had a rough, well, at least once a month,
Right.
you know, and then they could, like, probably set their own, you know, times and, you know, dates, you know, based on what works for them.
Right.
But there will be those questions about, you know, the parents want to know. Because if you have a high school student, you might be like, oh, that's great because they can drive themselves. I don't need to worry about it. Good for you.
Yeah.
But if I have a sixth grader, that is going to depend on me to get them wherever. I need to know if it works in the rest of the schedule, you know, whatever activities they have. So,
So I think we
Yeah.
could set a minimum. I mean,
yeah.
you know, at a minimum, you'd want monthly, you know, meetings for this. But, you know, we could put an asterisk, you know, subject to committees, blah, 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 whatever, right? But the thing I will say is, you know, similar to this, how I always look at it in my day job work. If you put out something that the students are passionate about being involved in, they'll make the time commitment. It also helps to diversify the type of student that you're getting. So as an example, we have students involved in athletics. They practice 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. There's no issue with that time commitment, right? I started a workforce development program as part of my day job, and it's 5 days a week, 2-3 hours a day, and they're getting paid to participate. And up front, we had the question of, is this too much? Is this too intense? And then someone used the example of sports, and I said, no, you're spot on. If this is something they want to participate in, that they're really passionate, and it goes beyond putting it on their application, they'll find the time. And if the student body says, we want to meet weekly, right? If that's what that committee says and they're able to do that, great. But if they say we want to do a month, that's fine too. So I think we could put a minimum. I think it's a fair point to say let's put a minimum of monthly, but then once again create the space for the students to really dictate how often they'd like to do it.
So is this more like a steering committee, and would there be options like for students who don't want to commit to that, but to participate in something else, perhaps that's smaller?
I don't think so. This is a committee. Yeah. So we want to treat it just like any other, you know, board level committee. I think it would get complicated if you start to
Right.
do, you know,
Well,
levels.
just you know, when you
Yeah.
put it out there. I mean, because for the time commitment, I mean, you know, remember Chad Stanks certainly knows, and I did. Like if you have a child that participates with marching band,
Right.
There's
they
nothing but band.
they do it.
Or robotics.
Or
They do it
robotics, or
yeah,
right,
they
that's
do it
right.
every day after school. They don't get done till 6,
Right.
and it's their whole Saturday,
Right.
and they still agree to do it.
Right.
Year after year.
It's just
Year
finding,
after
yeah,
year
yeah,
after year.
yeah.
And then they find out they can participate in college.
That's right.
I just think it's a wonderful idea. I'm excited that you brought it forward, Trustee Wilson. And we have to remember that it's an iterative process.
Yeah.
we're gonna learn.
Yep.
And if we've never done it before, like if you've never done youth work or like youth engagement, it is a different process because you relinquish your power. You give the
Yes.
students the power. And so just know that it'll be iterative, but it'll be a great thing for our district.
And they'll figure it out.
They will definitely figure it out.
And I love that aspect of it. One question is, certainly the committee themselves is an important thing. Have we thought, or how might this apply to the board? You know, we've had representation that historically has been here at the board, for example, from the PCEA. The union representation here is sitting at the board table with us. Have we thought about having a student or perhaps someone from this committee that's a part of our board meetings?
That would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, I would hope that that would be one of the requests of this committee, or we could just
Yeah.
literally
Seat at the
establish that up front.
Yep.
I know, is it Livonia? No, who just,
Yeah, I sent an email to
Flint.
all board members where Flint
Flint?
recently
not Livonia,
appointed
right.
2 students to their board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and nationally, you see a lot of that. Nationally, and it varies. Literally, some of them have full voting privileges. Some of there are more to provide, you know, that voice and kind of that direct feedback. But remember, Kehoe, you're spot on. I think we have 2 options. We could either leave it up to the youth, you know, the students to make that request, or we could say it's that important as a board that we'd like to, you know, this seat.
Well,
I'd like the latter.
Well,
Yeah.
it may not be something that we have to do initially.
Right.
It's something that is an option for them to do, because they may feel that they have work that they want to do
Correct.
Right.
first,
Right. Right.
before they want to immediately jump into the
Yeah.
deep end of the pool.
Oh, these
Correct.
kids are amazing, though.
No,
They
but
They
it's-
are.
it's- it's
Yeah,
an
they
I
are.
option.
agree with you,
Yeah.
though,
It's an
because they
option
don't
for
know
them.
what they don't know, and
But
they
I-
might to do,
It's,
you know, some
it's not a,
training.
I don't think it should be a prescriptive. It should be, this is one of the things that we feel is important, and this is something if you want to do,
That's right.
we're allowing that. We want that to happen,
Yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic.
and not a requirement.
Absolutely, I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
And I just wonder too, from a, kind of along the same lines or lens, you know, opportunity to benchmark, you know, other districts that have similar committees to this, what has been successful, what has maybe been a pitfall, and try to avoid that, obviously, with this committee. So we can put
Absolutely.
our best foot forward.
No, I agree. And hopefully that'll be part of their work as well, is are they benchmarking with those students? I
Right.
think we can do our own benchmarking if
Yeah.
we'd like to, but I think the real power comes in if they're reaching out to students in other districts, whether they're reaching out to the students who just got elected or appointed to Flint or whatever the case is, so that they're making smart decisions on how they want to, you know, structure it.
Helping them with those things, doing some of that
Absolutely.
initial
Oh,
research,
yes.
if we can
Yeah.
help with that, you know, giving them a jump start.
Right.
Because rather than having them come in with just a blank
You
slate.
can't. No,
you know,
that's
give
right.
them give
Yeah.
them the
That's
jump
right.
start.
Yeah.
Here's ideas. Here's things that other districts have done.
That's
I love the idea of benchmarking. We're not going to be prescriptive,
Right.
but here's 10 districts that have implemented this kind of program
That's
in the
right.
ways that they've done it.
Absolutely.
Something for you to consider.
And that's our role, really, on that committee, is as a coach, as a mentor, giving guidance, right? Absolutely. So we can't just say, okay, here you go, you know, bring us an agenda. You know, one.
And they're like, how do you build an agenda?
Yeah, exactly. But also that's the consultant role too, because the other piece of it is, you know, we need someone who can help do the data points for them. That can help, because we also don't want to
Burden them.
commitment. Yeah, we
Yeah.
don't. We also want to make sure that we're giving them the tools to be successful around this as well.
Sure.
Well, we don't want this to become something where this is just, we're feeding them what we want them to bring back.
Absolutely.
'Cause
That's the importance of the
that's
third
not-
party.
That's not very helpful. We don't need somebody to do that for us.
Right. That's right.
We can just make it decisions without kids.
That's right. That's
But,
right.
you know, in the past, like when we've had some students that show up at board meetings, like for a long time, you know, Dalton came and he talked about the theater. And, you know, sometimes not great when he Dalton?
Yeah, we had Dalton and we had Aiden.
And
that
then
both
Aiden.
came. But the thing that was remarkable about those students was they didn't come and just speak for citizens' comments. They came and stayed for the whole meeting, and they learned how things worked. And then they were able to be much stronger advocates for what they cared about, because they understood how the process was going on. And that was outstanding things, that the impact that they had, because they learned what we did, was really powerful.
And they brought in other students, and they took some of that learning from this meeting, took it back to the park, and talked to the administrators about changes, once they learned about it here.
Yes.
That's
Mhm. It was powerful.
So what's our next steps? I don't know. What is our next step, Sean?
Well,
I'm sorry,
I
Mr.
consider this I consider this like a first reading,
Okay.
right? So I would assume we'd want to bring it back, give you guys a ample opportunity to review it, any questions, and then,
So you're.
It'll need
looking
an
for-
action item for the next
So
time.
you're looking.
If it's a first read, right?
So you're looking
Correct.
for like a resolution to adopt this, okay? So if anybody has questions, concerns, edits, send them to Mr. Wilson.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have additional discussion, resolution opposing Let Michigan Kids Learn Voucher Initiatives, Member Sadoo.
Thank you, Member, or President McCoyne. We actually got an email from MASB and our local Wayne County Association of School Boards that gave us a sample resolution to oppose Let Michigan Kids Learn Voucher Initiative. And I asked President McCoyne if we could bring it up in today's meeting, number one, to talk about it, and then two, talk about next steps within the board and our community. So just for the people that are out there watching and people in the audience, some of you may have heard about the voucher proposal that's been going around backed by DeVos called Let Michigan Kids Learn. This voucher proposal could pull away hundreds of millions of dollars from our public school system. And this is the exact opposite of what we need right now. We need more funding. We need full funding for all of the programs, particularly our special ed programs. Not to take funding away. We need to fully fund public education. So that's critical. So this is the opposite of what we need. I wish they would push for that policy in terms of fully funding public education as opposed to taking it away, but that's what they're pushing, and we need to make sure that we're educating in our community about this. So the key piece of this is the money that's taken away from public schools would be funneled into a fund for vouchers that could be taken to private schools. And Michigan voters will not be able to vote on this proposal. Think about that. There is no public voting of this from our Michigan voters. And that should be scary. That should scare everybody. So this is a backdoor scheme to a voucher program without giving Michigan voters the opportunity to vote on such a critical piece of legislation. So what can we do? One, review the resolution that was provided to us, and then at the next meeting, take a vote on it. Two, share with our community members what this means. What is behind Let Michigan Kids Learn voucher program or the proposal? They're not going to call it a voucher program. No. They're going to actually go around saying, here's a petition. Sign this petition to support Michigan schools. Let Michigan Kids Learn. Who wouldn't want to sign that? But don't sign it, because that is a backdoor program to funnel money into a voucher program. So I would like to talk to my colleagues about how do we do this within our community when we cannot use, obviously, district dollars with this. So how do we as a board allocate some time and energy into educating our community about this? So besides the resolution, I want to talk about what can we do as a board.
Can we get this information to the individual PTA groups? Because most of them meet. Or
Parent council?
The parent council, because they have, ideally, they have representatives from all the schools.
Yeah, I actually have an update on parent council, so
There we go.
I can definitely go to their next meeting and give an update, but getting broader, we need to get more people aware of this.
Right, so I think I want to make sure that we're in compliance with what we're doing and we're not causing a problem for the district in this process. I'm entirely for us as board members advocating. This is within our roles and responsibilities as elected officials, but I want to make sure that nothing that we're doing is crossing the lines of what's allowed for a public school district to do.
Right.
So we need to make sure that we're very cautious about how we approach these things and that we're not putting the administration in an awkward position in this process.
Right. The biggest thing is no district dollars can be used for this conversation. In terms of if we go out, we make copies using district resources.
So towards that end, can we meet with PTAs or PTOs and parent council committees?
Yes, as long as we are giving factual information.
Okay.
So the factual information would be, we looked at a resolution, here's what the resolution says. Here's what's behind the proposal. The fact that this would not be out for a vote, and it's a petition. And giving them a link to another website that I will share with you where they could go get further information,
Factual information.
factual information.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there a template for a private citizen to, not a resolution, an email that they can send, or language that they can use to send to elected officials, or like just something that's not in a resolution format, something that a private citizen can use
Yes.
to oppose this?
Yes, there is a website where parents can sign up or a citizen can sign up, and I signed up. They have webinars, evening meetings, mostly via Zoom, and then you learn about it. So I will get you that website where you can sign up and share it with your circles. So Member McCoyne, if we could put this up for a vote for our next meeting?
Yes, yes.
Is it time sensitive?
Yes, we have time for the next meeting. With regard to, when is the last date to file the petition? That I don't know.
I think that, to Ms. Chastang's point, this is essentially, we're advocating for people to decline to sign. If certainly we're talking about that here, but waiting another 2 weeks for this is not in the best interest. I think that, ultimately, this is a small step that we can make, but I would advocate that we not wait, that we move forward with this process today and approve this resolution, because that sends a very clear message that we do not believe that this backdoor voucher initiative is in the best interest of our community and the best interest of public education.
Yeah, I just want to make sure people had a chance to read the resolution. It's also in your packets.
Right, so so towards that end, if anybody feels that we should wait, then I would have no problem waiting. If people feel comfortable proceeding, then I would suggest that we do. And I would not hesitate whatsoever to wait if someone would prefer more time to review and read this.
I'm comfortable moving forward tonight.
Yeah,
So am I.
I'm comfortable moving forward as well.
All right, so, then I'm thinking the action item is 220469. 220469. So then I am looking for a motion that we are going to
Should we read the,
I would read the resolution
Resolution.
first, yeah.
or we can make the motion and then read the resolution, but we
Yeah.
should formally read the resolution.
Okay.
Do we have a copy of it that we could put up on the screen? Okay. If we could, I think it'd be useful to do that, because for the people that are watching in the audience or those that are at home, hearing us read it is helpful, but being able to see it is better for them.
Well, let me find,
I think that Nick is trying to find it right now.
okay, because Ms. Sadoo sent, right, so,
Right, it just, well, actually, Nick, does this show up on the, it shows up on the video? Okay, no, that's fine.
while you look for that, can we look at considering action item, which would be consider the approval of a resolution opposing Let Michigan Kids Learn voucher initiatives? And that would be,
220469.
yep, 22-04-69.
Second.
Okay. So it's moved by member Sadoo and seconded by member Kehoe. Oh, did you want me to read this?
Whoever wants to read it, I can read it, whatever.
Yeah, you can read it.
All right. Resolution opposing Let Michigan Kids Learn voucher initiatives, whereas the Michigan Constitution states no public monies or property shall be appropriated or paid or any public credit utilized by the legislature or any other political subdivision or agency of the state directly or indirectly to aid or maintain any private, denominational, or other non-public elementary or secondary school. And whereas vetoed House bills 4504 and 4505 and vetoed Senate bills 687 and 688 conferred an eventual $1 billion per year in unconstitutional credits to be used for an unconstitutional backdoor private school voucher program. And whereas letters vetoing those bills pointedly stated redirecting public school dollars for private gain is not only ineffective, it has been roundly rejected by Michigan voters, with more than 69% voting no on a proposal that would have allowed the use of tuition vouchers for non-public schools. And simply put, our schools cannot provide the high-quality education our kids deserve if we turn private schools into tax shelters for the wealthy. And whereas in response to the vetoes, tuition voucher advocates have launched the Let Michigan Kids Learn and Student Opportunity Scholarship statutory initiatives to place those bills into law. And whereas under Michigan law, the legislature can bypass Michigan citizens' ability to vote on a statutory initiative that collects only 347 signatures from more than 8 million registered voters. Now, therefore, be it resolved as follows. 1, that the Plymouth Canton Community School Board of Education opposes the Let Michigan Kids and Student Opportunity Scholarship statutory initiatives being solicited by the organization called Let Michigan Kids Learn, and urges the community members to decline to sign the petitions for the initiatives. And 2, that the Plymouth Canton Community Schools Board of Education calls upon the legislature to reject the statutory initiatives in the event they are presented to the legislature. And 3, that the Plymouth Canton Community Schools Board of Education calls upon the legislature in the event they do not reject the statutory initiatives to refrain from voting on them to allow the citizens of Michigan to vote on the matter. And 4, that a copy of this resolution be sent to 1, all elected members of the Michigan House of Representatives and Michigan State Senate who represent the Plymouth Canton Community School District, and the leadership of the Michigan House of Representatives and the Michigan Senate, and 3, the Michigan Association of School Boards.
All right. Anybody have any questions? All right, I will call for the vote. All in favor say yes.
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 Any opposed say no. All right.
Thank you for bringing that forward.
Thank you.
And Member McQuinn, before we end tonight's meeting, can I just give a quick update on the parent council meeting from yesterday?
Yes.
I had the opportunity to attend because it was the end of the day, and I actually have a little bit more time because some of you know with my recent change, I have been able to be more involved. So parent council was one on my list. I want to thank the parent council group for coordinating a meeting that was filled with student voice. You talk about student voice. Dr. Merritt was there. She was celebrated for her recent accomplishment. But they started the meeting with a statement supporting a safe and inclusive environment for our students and denouncing racism and hate. So I applaud them for that. And they are accepting nominations for the parent council officer positions for next year. You have 1 month, so people in the community, if you're listening, watching, they have openings for you. The other big piece was Sherry Steckel, the principal from Plymouth High School, gave a lot of phenomenal end-of-year updates for parents. And I want to point out, one of the biggest highlights for me was watching our teacher, Jay Opsonick, talk about the Lightning Robotics program. I mean, talk about a teacher that is filled with passion and love for kids. So they went to states and world competition, and I got to pull up my website. They won worlds for this entrepreneurship award. Our kids won world record. I mean, they won a world award for this entrepreneurship program. So I wish Jay was here to talk about that. He has over 200 kids involved in this club. So I want to thank him for his dedication to the robotics program and his for ongoing countless hours to the kids that he loves so dearly. The other big piece was 88.1 Salem student, is it Evie? Evie. Evie promoted the 88.1 Park Radio program, and they're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. They also won a ton of awards. So PSEP has been in the news so many times with so many great awards. And the awards are not done, because Diane from PSEP Hospitality and Culinary Arts Program also talked about their award-winning program. And the other big piece was the SJ5K student leaders came to promote the SJ5K run that we are going to and sponsoring. And I really want to say, this is a student-led program, and their hearts and souls are into this, into the 5 families that are being honored this year. They showed a video, and please, could we send it to them? Please watch this video. If it doesn't bring you tears, I'm not sure what's going on. Because the video is so touching in the terms of the families that are going to be impacted by this year's SJ5K run. And every year they do a phenomenal job. So I hope to see my board colleagues out, whether it's for a 1 mile or a 5 mile run or walk.
Or walk.
Let's clarify that.
It's a
Let the minutes
5K,
reflect.
right? So that's a
5K.
3.1 mile run.
5K or mile, run or walk.
Right, right. But if you want to do the extra 2 miles, you can.
So that's it for me. But thank you for all the great updates from that team.
Excellent.
Ms. McCoy?
Yes?
Mr. Dewey actually reminded me of something that I'd seen. I went to the robotics rollout presentation probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. And one of the things that they had there is they have a presentation called the chairman's presentation. And the chairman's presentation is a student presentation that kind of explains what the robotics program does and the impact that it has in the community and how they are on our school district and how they promote and bring that program forward. And I think that this would be a fantastic presentation for us to see here at the school board and to share with our community. I was blown away by the quality and the articulateness of those students and the program that they run and the depth and scope of what they've done over the last 20 years. And I think it would be a great program for us to see here as a district.
Would love to see that.
And Dr. Merritt, Mr. Opsonick mentioned some events that they're going to be promoting the program. I think Robots in the Park and some of the other ones. Can we get a list of those dates and send it to the board so we can learn more about, in addition to what Member Kehoe said?
And with respect to the chairman's presentation, obviously we'd need to move quickly on this to make sure that it's on the agenda, because I think some of those students are seniors. So perhaps at the next meeting.
Anything else? All right, so in our last meeting, our follow-up board questions, the board asked for clarity on whether the list of food allowed to be brought in for school parties was recommended or required.
It's still outstanding, isn't it?
I believe we got
thought
the
we got it in board
response, and
note.
it is required.
Okay, sorry about that.
It was not recommended.
Yeah. The board asked for confirmation that the new P-CCS website was being tested for screen reader compliance.
We got the details on that.
The board would like to receive analytics data and projections for the new P-CCS website. You
I
got
got
that?
The one thing that, that struck me on that is, I'm not sure it was the existing metrics that were there, not so much the projections of, or the targets of what we have. So I don't know if you've done anything with that, Nick, is to say.
Yeah, because I think the note was, here's the current numbers.
Right.
Projections would be following. Right?
Correct. Thank you, Trustee Wilson. In the marketing plan, which will be part of board notes.
Okay,
Our court will include our quarterly marketing plan and board notes. That'll have projections and goals.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
So is that a left-on question until then?
No, I think if that's how it's gonna be sent, then I think to me that's closed.
Okay.
Correct. Yep, I took that.
All right. So then for tonight, I had that, is the hate bias part of, training part of the required modules for staff?
Yeah, and specifically a list of all the modules that are there as well.
Yes, and a list of the modules. Is that the list of all the offerings or what they're required to take? Required.
Yeah, to me
Okay.
it's required, yeah.
All right. And then, update on the restorative practices training for staff?
And all the other training that Dr. Merritt mentioned. Where are we with all the different training programs that were mentioned?
And specifically the percentages of staff who have gone through those trainings.
Yep.
All right. You good with that, Diane? Ms. Robertson?
The training programs that Dr. Merritt mentioned in her listing today during the superintendent's report, I believe there were about 6 or 7, if not maybe a little bit more. Dr. Merritt, if you could give her the listing of those.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
And then, the dates for robotics. For future topics, I have, baseline data on race-based incidents presentation. And then a request to see this data 2 times a year. Race-based trauma presentation for the community, similar to what we saw at a special meeting. And then a presentation on the robotics chairman's presentation program.
We
Is that-
mentioned, I asked specifically about the code of conduct, and it was being updated in the student handbook. So when
Oh,
I say
yes,
code
I'm
of
sorry, I
conduct and the
have this
student
on the-
handbook are
Oh.
the same. So is it going to be updated by the fall?
school
Like
year. So
I would
that'll
like
be-
to have a date, like when
Yes.
are we gonna do it, and not just arbitrary, like we're updating it.
No.
It'll be in place by the fall?
Work will be this summer. When they sign for the fall, that will
It'll
be
be-
in place for students to sign
Okay,
for the fall.
Great, thank you.
all right.
Fall of next year,
The
next
fall of,
school year.
the fall of this upcoming school year.
Thank you. Just making sure.
September 2022.
Yes.
It's gonna be done in September, September 2027.
That is part of the back-to-school check-in, the updated handbook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so did anybody have anything else? All right, and then we have come to the end of our agenda, and we are adjourned. It is 9:20. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And lots of,
Thank you. You guys, I so appreciate
Congratulations.
that. I
Monica.
so appreciate that. Thank you so much.